Thank you. It's a pleasure to come back. I have very good memories of Houston, and it continues upon my return. People are nice. There's some nice folks. I was just in LA, and it's a very different vibe, but, folks are very easy to access here. I think people have, including New York, they put up their guard. So again, thank you, and thanks to the CAMH folks. It's been an amazing experience working with them to install the show. And initially, I was really anxious about presenting this this work here because the space is deceptive. It's not a square space, so you're never quite sure how it fills or the volume of it. So even when they chose the particular works, I was like, you think that's going to work there? It's a lot. And upon presenting it, I was really excited that you could kind of stay on one side and be in another era for me anyways, just like the 90s, the Amazing Grace piece, and then look all the way over here. And it's kind of like these two pieces have been really important, so almost like bookends for my trajectory or practice so far. So for me, it was really satisfying to see how it was the space accommodated the work and the ability to sort of literally stay from one side to the next and see the entire show. So I'm really proud of being able to present it here. So upon putting myself in a predicament of presenting work or talking about the work, which I hate to do, by the way, it's like slow death of the work up here. So I decided I was going to talk about what isn't in the show, and talk about some of the works that I did. Some of them no longer exist, but some of them are also works that sort of brought me to where I am now, and so I'm really proud of that as well. This body of work started with this idea. I was really intrigued with this idea, and a lot of my work is basically I'm a quilter. Here's the confession. No, I think I do a lot of things that's about weaving. It's about bringing these materials that are seemingly different into one volume, one form, one system. So the weaving of that is what I try to give license to. That's kind of what the entire research becomes about, like what things get woven together and why, to give me that energy to make it happen, to make it real, and to engage the imagination. So this particular body of work, I'll make sure it's coming up here. I was doing a residency in Sabbath Day Lake, Maine, with the last remaining Shaker community. A lot of people don't know this. I think there may be even just 6 of them left. Is 2? Yeah. So then it was 8. And it was a really intriguing project this Franz Moran, curator, organized. And the idea was contemporary artists would work with the Shakers, help them on the farm. And in the evening time, we would sort of join them in meals and have some kind of discussion period. And then we'd go to our studios and try and build something around the experience. So being that I use discards most of the times, I wanted to figure out what I could work with in that community. At just that time, though, I think it was like maybe Oprah or somebody else had bought a record sort of Shaker collection. And so it was really, everything now Shaker was just money. It was seen as a big commodity. So there wasn't any discards, right? So it wasn't like I was going to go find a broken piece and try to do something with it. So I remember going to one of the brothers and saying, Brother Arnold, and saying, what can I do here? I don't really have a material to work with. And he said, you should go to the old Shaker dump site. And so maybe you can find something there. But that dump site hadn't been used for like 40 years. So I said, all right, let me go. By the time I went, it was just mounds of grass. But I did start to see, as I stood there, I started to see these unbroken bottles. And so every day I would go and dig for these bottles. And the idea was to sort of weave them together in a quilt. So this piece kind of emerged, became a really important piece for me. It was called Vertical Hold. And it was just hours of putting these bottles into one community. I kind of think of bringing them together in the sense of a community. And in this piece, they became a kind of boundary that you had to negotiate from one side to the other. And then it ended up manifesting itself as a kind of circular form, which I was really pleased with that resolution. But it gave birth to this piece, which is called Hunger Cradle. And the building that I decided to show this in was an old firehouse. And in that firehouse, in addition to being a firehouse, it had, by the time I was working with it, it's not my studio, but by the time I was working with it, it had gone through the life of being a piano moving company, a limousine service. And so there were remnants of that history in this space. And my idea was to collect these discards and try to basically weave them together. And the only rule I made for myself, and I was lucky this worked out because it was a piano moving company, there were all these old ropes. And so it gave me a kind of backbone to structure this weaving around. And I was using this yarn that basically was, a remnant from my experience with the Shakers, because they made their own wool yarn. So the notion of like making all these, uniting all these materials and all this history was really the key. Titles are really important to me. Hunger, Cradle was a really, a lot of the work is not just about, finding the right title is really important because it kind of gives the viewer the level of access that I'm interested in and how to get them to, not necessarily to where I am, but how to get them into the arena of experience that I want them to think about. So the notion of hunger as being something about need and cradle as something about care was really important. And I feel like that was kind of what I was trying to do is add this element of care to these things that might be seen as, as garbage. And that's the key, garbage. I never use that word. I don't know why I used it in front of you guys. It's usually discards or remnants. Garbage is what you leave on the side of the road when nobody wants it. But when it still has hope, when it still has possibilities, I don't see it as garbage. So I don't really see myself as one of these green artists. Not that they're bad. It's not that. That's not my starting point. I think it's a great thing that you can find things that need to be transformed and made into something that people can appreciate as beauty. But for me, it's always the found object, the idea of this thing inspiring a journey, right, is the key thing. And I'm never sure where that journey is going to be or where it's going to take me. So it's not always about the transformation as the starting point. It's also about the context of how this thing lives in the community or why the community decided not to pay attention to it anymore. So there is that sort of inside the space. So I'm going to touch on something that was a real challenge and an interesting thing for any artist. So somebody decided they wanted the piece, a collector. It's like, oh my goodness, So I didn't realize, I never thought about it. As a young artist, you just want to make the stuff and figure out where it's going to take you. So I never really thought about what would happen if it needed to be in another space. And in some ways, I was like, no, it would never work. It doesn't live in another. It doesn't make sense. So I kind of had to figure out if I wanted to make a living and figure out how this thing could live. Either I just let it go and deal with it maybe as images, or actually we didn't even have, at that point, photography wasn't that big. You couldn't think about making a living off your work the way many artists might do now, where they just take a beautiful image and blow it up and sell it. So I was thinking, well, I have to figure out another way for this work to live. So the conceptual underpinning to this work became, and it actually had, because of the opportunity, became in each venue, I incorporate a new object. So this idea of consumption, and the work gets built around the new context, which I was really happy with that resolution. In this particular one, I think I have another image of it here. I was lucky because it was in the foundation that owned it. They happened to have a show before, when I went to do my site visit. They had a show of video art, and it was all of these pedestals. And that was kind of all they had, were pedestals and projectors. I didn't really want a projector, so I said, I'll incorporate the pedestals into the new piece that was coming in. And it worked out great because the pedestals were almost the same size as the pillars of the room. So it looked as if the web was like eating the room. So that was really fortuitous. There's another example of like that. So in each venue now, including the new museum, it incorporates certain elements are incorporated into the piece. So I wanted to show this piece also. It's another one, whereas a lot of my work, I think about them in terms of performance. So it's not about this thing as this the end result as much as how it lives in the world, or how it can talk about some aspect of devotion, or something about the community that I can express with the journey that I wanted to make. Sometimes it starts out very personal, and then the challenge is how to make space for other interpretation. So again, part of that Shaker experience, I was talking to one of the brothers, and he was talking about why the Shaker chairs were so special, what made them have the power that they have. And he said, a little granola in a way, but I got inspired by it. He said that they made it as if an angel was to sit in it. I was like, and there was something poetic about that, and it stayed with me. At first I was like, yeah, right, but then after, it stayed with me that imagination of expectation was engaged. And I said, well, I want to think about that. I want to think about making a throne that I get to push around. So this is basically a throne. It's a chair. There's a gate inside. There are wheels. There's earth. There's clocks, springs. And so I did this performance where I sort of dressed up in my Sunday fineries and pushed it from my studio, which was at that time on 125th Street, and the east side, to the Abyssinian Baptist Church, which was more, closer to 138th Street and Lenox Avenue, roughly about 2.5 miles. So I pushed this thing to the church. I did a kind of ceremony of cleansing, and then I pushed it back. And the video is kind of that. So on the left side is just me going from my studio to the church. And then on the right side is me coming from the church back to my studio. Yeah, so when I got to the church, nobody bothers you in New York. Any questions? So I didn't quite fit. It was important that I dress up, because I didn't want to look like somebody marginalized, like a homeless person. So that was even confounding to them, like, what is this? And I like that space to put the viewer in, public in. I think what is this viewer space is a curious space, a space where if they're asking questions, they're also trying to figure out where they reside in the narrative. So I was really excited about that being presented here. This is actually my first performance. I was really stressed about this, just because it was the first time I've done something like this. The video was shot by a good friend of mine, Marcel Odenbach, he's German videographer. So the blue, you can still hear me. The video's going on. The blue bag has 3 clocks in it. So I'm kind of heavy into symbolism, and I really wanted this element of time. And growing up as a Baptist, I think 3 has always been a kind of number that I settle on. If I'm going to do 1, then I'll do 2, and then 2 becomes 3. It's a family, some correlation of that. Not even the police really cared then, that time. They had other problems to consider. That's, for me, using the public as a space you're never sure what's going to happen. And it's a testing ground. So I'm always excited about, I also made another piece that, called Crusader, that I built an object on wheels it's actually a shopping cart that I pushed to the mobile gas station and back to my studio. So, the idea of doing semi-political work, and I say semi because the gallery is never the perfect space if you really want to engage with people on doing activist work. I just recently saw a brilliant show of Hans Haacke at a new museum, and he's a kind of a hero of mine. But I've always been critical of the work in the sense that the audience for it is quite limited, and like preaching to the converted in a way. But at the same time, I appreciate that space that he's trying to create. And that space, for me, is also, I think, the space of mysticism, the space of activism, the space of change, the space of possibility, of imagination. I feel like all of that is a clear ground to negotiate, and then have an expectation for this object that you're going to make to live into, for that possibility. So anyway, I got to the church. On the right, you see me start to come to that church, and basically what I did was the ceremony where I had pre-LeBron James, by the way. I had baby powder, and I kind of just sort of threw the baby powder up in the air and just kind of created this other moment for almost kind of a libation moment. So talking about political work. So a lot of the work starts from anxiety, like something in the news, something that you feel, with the Crusader, it was the Iraq invasion and the kind of skepticism that we were going there for the oil. And so the idea of how do you deal with that anxiety? How do you deal with that tension? And I feel like it's something that I try to put into work. It's something that drives the labor of the work for me, and also the challenge of how the work can live in the world, what space it's trying to negotiate. So around this time, there were all these, this is Bush. Yeah, this is maybe Father Bush. So this is his point, his era. Or maybe, no, this is Clinton. So anyway, it was Rwanda, Americans' lack of involvement in trying to change, affect the genocide that was going on. And you'd go on the news and you'd just see these bodies and misery. And then you go about your normal day. And that's kind of how we have to survive. That's nothing critical against it. That's just how we negotiate trauma. So I really wanted to find a way, build a sculpture that should face it and define it and place it somehow. Maybe it was my therapy, I don't know. But anyway, so I did this piece called, it was presented and made for the Whitney Biennial, the 96 Biennial, I believe. And so this is a hearse that I cut in half. It's greased, it's sort of tar and feathered, and on top are car mufflers. And on the bottom are sort of pipes. And it's sort of in this cage. So the whole idea was this notion of like silencing death, right? Like mufflers on top of this cloud of mufflers, trying to silence the death that's so pervasive and sort of put it in its place. The inspiration for this piece, strangely enough, for me, you wouldn't know this, but I remember, there was I lived on 125th Street. My studio at the time was right across the street from a firehouse. And the firehouse was getting renovated. And so what they did was I'd never seen this. They built a little cage for the fire truck so nobody would vandalize it. So that, so it couldn't be inside, so they had it outside. And I think people do this all the time. They kind of normalize that, but I always thought this cage fire truck was just the most magical thing. And so I sort of took a cue from that, this idea of holding this monster in place and trying to control it. And so that's how the idea of the cage kind of came about. It's another view of it. This got Klaus Curtis in a lot of trouble. It was great. Klaus Curtis, amazing curator from the Whitney Museum. So he commissioned this piece for the biennial, and he was excited to do it. I was excited to have the challenge to do it. But what I never thought about, and it's something that we never thought about, was the off-gassing, right? It was greased, so there was all this off-gassing from petroleum. And so I'm surprised they didn't shut the thing down, to their credit. Some of the guards were going home with headaches. It was a nightmare for that, but it was power, So in a way, I was kind of gleefully enjoying the moment, but it was probably a difficult thing for them to negotiate. It stayed up, to their credit, though. They did keep it all the time up. One funny anecdote. So I was approached almost towards the end of the show. Klaus came to me and said, we've been sued. And I said, what do you mean? He says, yeah, unfortunately somebody, their mink coat rubbed up against the grease. And so we have to pay this, I think it was like an $850, I don't even know why, anyway, $850 bill to clean this person's coat. And I said, this is outrageous. We shouldn't do this. This is not, they should have stayed away, blah, blah, blah. And so my brother is a lawyer, and I was, talking about, how outraged I was and how people are greedy, and, so of course he's defending. He's kind of an ambulance chaser, and so he was defending the woman's right to sue me, and he said, yes, actually, you're right. The work constitute what they'd call in legal terms an attractive nuisance, and I always loved that. So I actually made a show called Attractive Nuisance after that. So this is I wanted to show this piece and how it was inspired by a series of different moments. So this is Reverend Al Sharpton's National Action Network. It's still there. It's on right in my neighborhood on 145th Street, between 8th Avenue and Lenox Avenue. And it's a place where the community comes to voice any abuses there, tenants, police. You always hear when Sharpton's making some proclamation, it's there. So what's interesting about this space for me is that you can see it. It used to be a gym. It's called a Diamond Gym. And I thought, and it still looks like it still even has Diamond Gym on the glass. And inside, there's still the mirrors on the wall. And I always thought how magical this idea that a space of like community, community voice could be a space of physical transformation, right, for the body, building the community. So there was something really poetic and right about the correlation of the gym and this sort of community space. So soon after I was invited to do a project in New Orleans. This is right after Katrina. This is a little bit earlier on. And Dan Karaman, the curator, wanted me to do something. He knew that I was early on. The reason I found that firehouse is actually I wanted to present Amazing Grace in a church. It's hard to find an empty church in Harlem, but he knew there were a lot of empty churches, unfortunately, in the lower 9th Ward post-Katrina. So he invited me to come and look and see if I wanted to do something in a church. And so I found this church called the Battleground Baptist Church. And so I decided, instead of talking about the trauma that happened and the disappointment of, the political reaction to helping the people there, I wanted to talk about where the community was going to go, like what the hopes for the community and the future for the community, and put the focus on that. And so it came, so this is the inside of the space. Amazing story about this structure. If you can kind of look at you can see the fan on the top there, the way it's kind of bowed down, just below the speaker. That's where the water level was up to. So the fact that the church actually stayed on the foundation is pretty miraculous and testimony to how it was built. So I really wanted to do something. The name, the Battleground, everything was just really right. So I made this proposal. This was it. I was going to make this diamond gym. This is quite literal. I was going to make this gym, this sort of diamond with exercise equipment. I was going to have a mirrored wall, and then outside, was going to be a bulletin board. Basically, the whole thing was a bulletin board for the community to sort of pin up pictures of their home, of their kids, of graduation, and I could also post sort of images or forms for them to get some kind of help if they needed it, whatever aids might be available. So that was kind of how it evolved, and I put this out for people to introduce myself, and I literally went door to door and brought apple pies to people because I really wanted to get to know the neighborhood and sort of make them understand what I was trying to do, explain that to them. And so, sort of make it theirs, figure out how to make it theirs. And that's what I feel like every time I do a public project, that's the hardest challenge is, coming into somebody's neighborhood, community, and sort of win that trust. How do you, especially coming from New York and an artist, my God, that's the most terrifying thing for folks sometimes because the sense of, this person somehow doesn't belong, and sort of let them feel that I want to be part of what they're building. So that was for me one of the hardest parts of this project, but I was able to do it. I had the time to take that on. So here are some of the images that ended up being on the wall. One of the things that I wanted, because of the church, the idea is to have a sound. And the sound, like Amazing Grace, sound is really an important detail. Sometimes the really sort of foundation for a lot of the projects. And in this one, my idea was, it was like this is pre-Obama's election. So it was just before that. So there's a lot of momentum of voting and change. And so I wanted to use, it was the voice of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and Marcus Garvey. I got little snippets from different speeches they had done, and I wanted to pick out the sort of hopeful sentences, the hopeful sort of phrases, and kind of made this sound compilation. So that was great. I was doing that, but then it just all felt so male. And then I needed a woman's, voice in here, and I didn't know who or what space that would occupy. And just by chance, I was listening to Larry King interviewing Tina Turner and asking her about her Buddhist faith, right? And he asked her if she does the Buddhist chant, and Tina went into this amazing Buddhist chant. I said, that's what I needed. So basically in the background, so there are all these, I'll play a little bit of it. And the idea was, once you're in that space, once you walk into the middle of the space, your body is kind of obliterated because the mirror has, I kind of etched into the mirror to sort of dislocate the presence of the viewer. And then you're also able to sort of read on the outside what's going on in the neighborhood. So it's like these almost like a kind of double space you're sitting in. And then the sound was I want people to be inspired. When they come out of there, the community to be inspired. I want people to feel, a kind of energy. So here's the sound that kind of came out of it. Hold on.
We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of
now. If you and I leave it up to the moderate,
this is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism.
Really mean anything.
Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice.
Every time they look over their shoulder, we want them to see us. We want to meet them.
Our educational, industrial, social, and political advancement.
We want to make them pass the strongest civil rights bill they've ever passed. Because we know even after they pass it, they can't enforce it.
To the solid rock of brotherhood, now is the time. Make justice a reality for all across the children.
We're starting a voters registration drive.
It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment.
Not as Democrats or Republicans.
So that was it. So the unfortunate reality of that piece was, it's a piece that I got very tight, very close with the reverend, the leader of the church. But because the congregation was spread away, they all left. I had, negotiated with him that they would take over the stewardship of the piece. I really wanted to give it to them. Unbeknownst to me, he passed away. And the new leader, I guess he wanted to prove how proactive he could be, and he went in there and threw everything away. So the whole piece was discarded. But I'm actually remaking the sound. The sound is the remnant that's left. So I'm recently, this is a sort of promotion moment, commercial moment. Prospect 5. This was Prospect 1. So Prospect 5 is going to happen next year, and the narrative, the conceptual aspect of it is the idea of revisiting history. So they're inviting a bunch of artists who were in Prospect 1, myself, Wengechi, Mutu, Mark Bradford, a bunch of artists are still going to be doing the Prospect 5, sort of reintroducing pieces in Prospect 5. And my idea is to try to figure out another life for the sound. So it should come back around somehow. So I'm excited that possibility came up. So talking about coming back to life. So this is a street memorial. I don't know, they must have this here in Houston. You'll see these in neighborhoods, usually low-income neighborhoods, or no, urban neighborhoods maybe. So what you almost always see are the flowers. Somebody's passed away, they sometimes tragically, sometimes not. Maybe an image of the person, but you'll always see alcohol, right? And alcohol as, almost like a marker of transformation, like this rite of passage. And I was really engaged with thinking about that and thinking that makes total sense. You know, the whole spirits, fermentation, transformation, it's a no-brainer. I'm like, yeah, that makes, you know, I understand why that would happen. So I wanted to do a piece that sort of addressed that, but found things. So here is this liquor sign that I remember seeing, actually right around the corner from Sharpton's National Action Theater. And these are abandoned signs. So what happens, the liquor store goes out of business. The signs are too big to take off the building. Nobody wants to pay for them to be removed. So they end up just being ghosts. So more than once, I've gone to the owner of the building and said, you know, that liquor sign that you have there, you know, would you mind if I take it down? And they don't even know that it's there. They forgot. They don't even look at it anymore. So for me, it's also really cool to get them out of the neighborhood. But so what I do is I turn them upside down, and this is kind of what I've done with them, and several iterations of them. The flowers are there, and then sort of illuminate within the words "liquor is a soul," and sort of bring that out. This is a bunch of them. And it's also a point where I wanted to bring the body back. The biggest challenge, I didn't want it to be a text piece per se. Nothing wrong with text pieces, but I really wanted to figure out how to bring an engagement with the body into it. So this is when I started using shoelaces and shoe tips. I wanted to use something that people right away had a connection to, and then figure out with that connection how that could take them somewhere else with their experience of it. So these kind of evolved out of that. The great thing, talking about titles meaning a lot, what's really important for these pieces that they're almost a kind of archaeology of the city, because the name of the piece is actually the name of the store. Like this one is called Radha Liquor Soul because of the store that's there is the Radha grocery store. So it's also a way to kind of tap into the history that's part of the city. So I found a bunch of these signs, and I was thinking, you know, I would be great to go to Houston or even LA, and they don't have S's. It's a real disappointment. You know, I couldn't do any more. There's no S, it wasn't until last week that I found out. I was like, and it makes sense. I was like, is it economics? Like somebody didn't want to pay for that extra S? But it was really, I think somebody said to me, no, it's like maybe it's the English iteration, like bitters, right? Like so that S has something more to do with the language than anything else. So I was thinking it was just about money, you know, but that made more sense. So this project I wanted to show, it was this is basically a trap that's really something inspired me. This idea. So the way this works is the fish should go in, and because its body, you know, it's placed in a closed form, it could go in, but it can't come back out. And I was always intrigued with this image of being able to access something, but your body won't allow you, or the change in environment doesn't allow you to come back out. Just culturally, I thought this was a really interesting form, conceptually. So I was invited to do this project at Massamoka. This is an Ansel Kiefer piece that was there. Really interesting artist. So Kiefer didn't like the floor that was there, right? And so he had them put in this hemlock floor, but they had to do it so quickly that the hemlock never really dried out, and probably so it started to warp and get funky. So the piece came up earlier than it needed to be. But when I got there, the piece was gone, and they wanted something for the space. And I said, you know what? I want the floor, because I thought that material was so powerful, the hemlock, that thick wood. And so in the end, I made this sort of piece out of this. I sort of smashed up the hemlock and made this fish trap. As you look inside, there are all these broken furniture and sort of home elements inside of it. So while I was working on this, you know, there was some press, you know, local press about artists from Jamaica. I don't know why they made it. You know, they want to romanticize my presence, which is fine. So I haven't been in Jamaica since I was 12, but they made it to be an artist in Jamaica. Actually, no, I know why they did it. Because I was making a parallel between the economy of Massamoka and the economy of Jamaica. in terms of dependency. Masamoka's dependency, cultural dependency on the arts now, and that's their industry now. It used to be Sprague Electrics, the electric industry, but the art was now the thing that they were marketing, and how Jamaica sort of markets itself for tourism. And so I was trying to make this parallel to both spaces, and a dependency of that space, of that drama that they put themselves in. So just so happens somebody heard that island person is in the vicinity. So he contacted the curator and said, "Does he want a boat?" So I ended up getting a boat. The only reason the funny irony is the only reason I liked the boat was it reminded me of Gilligan's Island, which is something I remembered back in the day. So it wasn't nothing in Jamaica, but I did want to make it for me. It also reminded me of these glass bottom boats. When Jamaican tourists would go on these boats that had glass bottoms so they could see down into the water. So I decided I wanted to make a kind of different iteration of the glass bottom, and sort of this boat that's on these. They're like barriers, these similar to the barriers that are in the naturalization space. So this kind of being pulled in, and you see these fishing wire that's kind of suspended out of it, almost like spurting out. So this is a funny body of work that I was excited to do, and I couldn't look at myself after doing it anymore, and so I grew this beard that I haven't stopped. This is a 4-year-old beard, and it happened exactly as a reaction to this. I think after the election with the new leadership, maybe I'll shave the beard, but I think I'm going to wait for that moment. I hope will happen. So this is me. It was a project I decided that I was in Rome at the American Academy, and I wanted to talk about. Okay, so this is what happened. I hope I have the time to say it. Okay, so I was at this event. I have a gallery in Italy, and I remember one of my gallerists introducing me to this individual, a collector there, and he did it again. He's like, "Oh, this is Nari. You remember the artist? He's from Jamaica, right?" And so I'm like, "Yeah, I guess so, So, but then it started, it reminded me of my connection to Jamaica, my disjointed connection to Jamaica. And I remember thinking about, the woman said something really interesting. She goes, "Oh, Nari, I know your work, but I didn't know you were Jamaican. Your work isn't very happy." So I was kind of taken back. And I should have been insulted, but I didn't really, I really realized that the era that she was going to Jamaica, the 70s, the sort of the notion of the happy Jamaican was what they were marketing, this kind of joyful Jamaican character. So I really wanted to mine that. And I remember my uncle, who was, he was a musician, he had this band called the Happy Smilers. And he would sing to the tourists, right? And it was a Mento band. And he would dress up, this is the outfit he would dress up in. He had this hat and this pink. And so I decided I wanted to take on this character, the sort of happy Jamaican. And my idea was to be in these homes and smiling. But it never worked, I wanted to be watered with people's houseplants. That was the idea. I was going to be watered with people's houseplants and I'd be smiling. But I couldn't smile, and so it ended up being this weird image of me sort of standing there, almost confronting the viewer. So, it's kind of funny, But you're not sure where this guy belongs, and that's kind of wanted. And the whole idea was, referencing houseplants. They're kind of vulnerable, they're dependent. They're also out of place in a lot of ways, and they need to be taken care of. So there was something about me correlating myself with that, but at the same time, I had agency, right? I was the one holding that. So the rules I set up for myself was they need to be where the houseplants were, and which is almost always near sunlight. And if there was other light, I would have it turned on. And of course, I'd have to just, be soaked, get wet. So there were a bunch of them. This was a great find because the outfit is almost the exact match with the. So I didn't change anything in this room except standing with the houseplants. Being at the American Academy was great because I got access to all these wealthy people's homes that normally they would never let me into. So it was a legitimatizing moment. So yeah, like that was great because I had to light the fire because, you know, again, I needed the light, all the light that I can add to this character. This is one of my favorites because there's a train going by. You wouldn't know it, but there's a train going by. We just captured that perfect moment the train went by. So I'm going to just go through these real quick. So this was a real interesting challenge. So in my neighborhood, that firehouse, I ended up living in that firehouse. Next door to me was an empty lot that was there for maybe 8 to 10 years. And in my neighborhood, it's kind of urban space. You'd say hello to some people, but you kind of kept your head down. And it's a rough neighborhood. So you kind of kept your head down and did your business and tried not to be noticed too much. And so at a certain moment, there was this big sort of construction fence went up and it said Chase Building Communities or something like that, right? And the Chase Bank. And right away, people who I never spoke to would start saying, oh, Chase is doing something next door to you. You know, like, so I realized that the Chase almost became like the weather. Like it was a safe thing to talk about because you wouldn't, you know, it was like the weather. You get in an elevator, you say, oh, it's a nice day today. It's safe. Nobody's going to be insulted by you asking about the weather. It's kind of like a territory of something you can't control, but we're all subject to. So I thought like, so Chase is a little economically, seems like it made sense. So I made these Chase weather maps that I was really, I had a lot of fun making the climate change. And then it got into, okay, maybe I could take this symbol that's so pervasive and so powerful. I mean, it's a logo. It's meant to be monolithic and sort of fracture it, right? And so this one is this Afro Chase. So I broke up these Afro picks and cowrie shells and sort of did acupuncture with the Chase sign. That was fun to do. So I wanted to go with back to the shoelace piece, right? And the newer iterations of the shoelace piece, I started looking at the civil rights era slogans and bringing that into a conversation. So it was a way to sort of talk about it in terms of the cyclical nature of what we're going through in this moment and the need for a kind of examination and change of it, but also the idea of our role in it. You know, so the shoelace has always been this material of I guess, inoculation, like bringing somebody into the conversation that they're a part of it. It's familiar material that you kind of everybody has an experience with in some way, either through learning how to tie it yourself or doing that for somebody else. So it brought us back to a kind of early experience that I really wanted to tie into these grander spaces of expectation. So there were a whole bunch of these that I started taking on. And you know, the idea was that they take on the wall like a silhouette or something. They because they're this humble material, I really wanted them to be drilled into the wall, that they become part of the wall. So I mentioned that my brother is a lawyer, and he used to, when he worked for legal aid, he used to have these business cards that had the citizens' rights on them, and you know, and so he'd give them out to his clients. And early on in my career as an artist, it was almost, you know, it was almost shameful to have a business card. I say that now. Artists are professionalized now. They'll have catalogs and websites, but back then, if you know, it was like a professional thing. But then people were like, "Oh man, that's a weird artist. You know, he's got a business card." So I decided, you know, I need to have a service connected to it. So I got my brother's business cards and took the citizen rights, and then I'd have on the other side my information. So, but then when I give them out, it was really interesting. The reaction people had was one of, "Oh, this is cool," and the other one was, "Oh, he thinks I'm a criminal." You know, like it was like this incriminating moment, and I didn't expect that. And I thought that was unfortunate that the citizens' rights, the rights that we all have as citizens that we should be proud of, was sort of put in this category of blame or guilt. So my idea was to make a kind of homespun version of it, a kind of like home sweet home version. So this became my home sweet home version of the citizens' rights. And then I did this piece, which is a kind of take on the idea of, I guess the idea of our notion of black male in their relationship to police, And I wanted to confuse that and complicate that, so it was a father and his two sons, a police officer father and his two sons, and I wanted to figure out how to have that representation in a kind of chanting of the citizens' rights. I'll just play a little bit of it. So they're standing there, and there's this anxiety of what's going on with these two young men. But you'll hear this father, police officer, say, "Take your time, you can do this." And that's Sharpton's National Action Network, by the way.
Take your time. You can do this.
So what he's going to say, when he starts...
to answer any questions until I speak to them.
So it's basically the citizens' rights that are sort of repeated and repeated, so almost being indecipherable. And this pat-down, what normally would be seen as a pat-down, is turned into a more kind of gentle embrace. So it's really sort of flipping all the expectation. I'm going to go through this really fast. This was a piece that a lot of people, you might see these in the neighborhood, maybe not. I don't know if you see these. They're police. They're almost like, it's a tower of power, I call it. It's a tactical platform. That's what it's called. It's a sort of police or sort of, in high crime neighborhoods, in my neighborhood, they'll set this up to just monitor what's going on. So it's a crime fighting element. So I wanted to sort of, it's funny, some people have no concept of what it is, and other people, oh yeah, I know this, see this all the time. But I wanted to use this and sort of create this almost fairy tale. There's a kind of Rapunzel dialogue that I wanted to set up with this tower. So there's this zippers. There's a line that's coming down. It's of male zippers with hair stuck to it. And it's coming all the way down from this, and this little afro-tailed fox named Cornell, named after Cornel West, is sort of looking at it. So it's a kind of a strange little, Occupy moment. And this is the last piece. I wanted to show this fun piece. This is a piece it's one of the pieces that's made me feel younger as an artist. So I was invited to do a project at Sugar Hill, in my neighborhood, Sugar Hill Museum. This museum, before it was built, this is what David Ager's museum. The architect who did it. But it's a project by Broadway Housing Community. It's a really great project that this organization does, where they incorporate within low-income housing a kind of museum or exhibition space, a kind of art pedagogical practice for the young people in the building. So I was invited by this organization, No Longer Empty, to do a project. It's a neighborhood I know, and I was thinking, what could I do in this neighborhood that I know so well? So I Googled the neighborhood, Sugar Hill. And right away, there was this discrepancy. I saw this news article about these two brands that were fighting for the use of Sugar Hill. They're actually breweries, Sugar Hill Brewery. And so they were actually, and none of them were in Harlem. So I said, this is really intriguing. They're all suing each other for the name, but none of them are really here. So I wanted to do this piece where the neighborhood would help support this building. So I did this piece called Sugar Hill Smiles. So I went around and I collected smiles from the neighborhood, and I canned them. So in each can, there was a little mirror. And I made a little Jamaican cart. And I think I can get this going. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. I'll just show a little bit of it. So this is some of them that I canned inside my studio, but most of them are canned on the street. You'll see me coming out of my studio, the old firehouse. That's a Jamaica. If you ever go to Jamaica, you'll see everybody has these little carts. Not as tricked out as mine though. That's aluminum. This was one of the projects I felt like I got younger. I literally was laughing the entire day. So we sold these smiles for, I think they were reasonable, $10. $10 for the smiles. And all the proceeds went to the border housing communities. Even in his skepticism, he still participated. You see the look on his face. Yeah, so I would right away can it up. That was important to keep them fresh. The one rule I made for myself is that you couldn't buy your own smile. If you were going to buy, you'd have to buy somebody else's. Because people really wanted their smile. I said, no, everybody's smile is the same. Favorite one. So anyway, that was really fun because I got a chance. Thank you. That whole idea of how the art can have a kind of social justice presence was really important for me, and I'm thinking about that moving forward in a lot of the new works. So, are there any questions, either what I might have said or something that you saw here that you're like, that's not right, I got to talk to him about it in the exhibition? Sorry? Oh yeah, the gallery. I had a gallery liaison, they call them. So she was spraying water on me. Off camera, yeah. Oh gosh, I'm doing a project this is kind of a strange one because I'm slated to do a show in Hong Kong, and you know what's going on there now. So I'm thinking about what I want to do for what would make sense for me in my trajectory, but also what would resonate there. And so that's a really great challenge to consider. So I'm making power shields. So I'm using shields that, the idea of a shield, police, and there's a whole range of symbols that go with this idea of authority, depending on what that police service might be. And I'm trying to create sort of body-size versions of that, but then mix in things that you wouldn't expect to sort of complicate what the notion of a shield might be. And it's something that I really wanted to be something that could be freestanding or against the wall. So I like that it's something that protects the body, but it could also turn into a declaration of some sort. Oh, when? I know, thank you for that. I'm looking at the news all the time. No, but it's not until January, it's not until February. So I'm hoping that they get things under, some resolution by then. Otherwise, I might not want to go there. Great. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it.